they'll tell you so. Rushing to and fro, he's the really useful engine we adore. He's the one, he's the number one. Thomas the Tank Engine. He's the really useful engine we adore.
James was enjoying his life on the island of Sodor, but he still had a lot to learn. "You're a special mixed traffic engine," said Sir Topham Hatt. "You can pull coaches or freight cars quite easily, but you must learn by your mistakes." James knew what Sir Topham Hatt meant. He could well remember that dreadful accident on his first day. "Be careful with the coaches, James," said kind little Edward. "They don't like being bumped." Everyone came to admire James. "I'm really a splendid engine," he thought, and suddenly let off steam. Whoosh! A shower of water fell on Sir Topham's nice new top hat. Just then the conductor blew his whistle, and James thought they had better go. Go on, he puffed to Edward. Don't push, replied Edward. The coaches were grumbling too. Don't go so fast, don't go so fast. But James didn't listen. When at last they stopped at the next station, two coaches were beyond the platform. They had to go back to let the passengers out. But no one seemed to know about Sir Topham's new hat, so James felt happier. Presently, they came to the station where Thomas was waiting with his two coaches. "Hello, James," said Thomas. "Feeling better? That's good." "Oh, that's my conductor's whistle. I must go. I don't know what Sir Topham Hatt would do without me to run this branch line." And he puffed off importantly. Edward and James passed the field where James had had his accident. The fence was mended and the cows were back again. They ended their journey and rested before setting off for home. James was still wondering what Sir Topham would have to say about his new hat. Next morning, he spoke severely to James. "If you can't behave, I shall take away your red coat and have you painted blue." James didn't like that at all. He was very rough at the grumbling coaches as he brought them to the platform. "Don't talk, come on." Gordon never has to fetch his own coaches, he thought to himself, and he's only painted blue. To make James even more cross, this time no one came near him. "I'll show them," he thought. "They think Gordon is the only engine who can pull coaches." "Hurry, hurry, hurry," puffed James. "You're going too fast, you're going too fast," replied the coaches. James laughed and tried to go faster, but the coaches wouldn't let him. "We're going to stop, we're going to stop." "What's the matter?" James asked his driver. "The brakes are on. Leak in the pipe, most likely. You've banged the coaches enough to make a leak in anything." "How shall we mend it?" said the conductor. "We'll do it with newspaper and a leather bootlace," replied the driver. "Well, where is the bootlace coming from?" asked the conductor. "Ask the passengers," said the driver. "You have a leather bootlace there," said the conductor to a smartly dressed man. "Please give it to me." "I won't." "Then I'm afraid the train will just stop where it is." The passengers all said what a bad railway it was. Then they told the man how bad he was instead. Everyone was very cross. At last, he handed his laces over. The driver tied a pad of newspaper tightly round the hole in the brake pipe, and James was able to pull the train. But he was a sadder and wiser James and took care. One day, James had to wait at the station till Edward and his train came in. This made him cross. Late again! Edward laughed and James fumed away. After James had finished his work, he went back to the yard and puffed onto the turntable. He was still feeling very bad-tempered. "Edward is impossible," he grumbled to the others. "He clanks about like a lot of old iron, and he is so slow, he makes us wait." Thomas and Percy were indignant. "Old iron? Slow? Why, Edward could beat you in a race any day." "Really?" said James. "I should like to see him do it." Next morning, James's driver was suddenly taken ill. He could hardly stand, so the fireman uncoupled James ready for shunting. James was impatient. Suddenly, the signalman shouted. There was James puffing away down the line. "All traffic halted," called the signalman. Then he told the fireman what had happened. Two boys were on James's footplate fiddling with the controls. Phew! They tumbled off and ran when James started. The signalman answered the telephone. "Yes? He's here." "Right. I'll tell him. The inspector's coming at once. He wants a shunter's pole and a coil of wire rope." "What for?" wondered the fireman. "Search me, but you'd better get them quickly." The fireman was ready when Edward arrived. The inspector saw the pole and the rope. "Good man, jump in." We'll catch him, puffed Edward. James was laughing. What a lark! What a lark! He chuckled to himself. Suddenly, he was going faster and faster. He realized that he had no driver. "What shall I do? I can't stop! Help! Help!" We're coming, called Edward. Edward was panting up behind with every ounce of steam he had. At last, he caught up with James. "Steady, Edward," called his driver. The inspector stood on Edward's front, holding a noose of rope in the crook of the shunter's pole. He was trying to slip it over James's buffer. The engines swayed and lurched. At last, "Got him!" he shouted. He pulled the noose tight. Gently braking, Edward's driver checked the engine speed, and James's fireman scrambled across and took control. "So, the old iron caught you after all," chuckled Edward. "I'm sorry," whispered James. "Thank you for saving me." "You were splendid, Edward." "That's all right," replied Edward. The engines arrived at the station side by side. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting. "A fine piece of work," he said. "James, you can rest and then take your train." "I'm proud of you, Edward. You shall go to the works and have your worn parts mended." "Oh, thank you, sir," said Edward. James is a mixed traffic engine. He can pull both freight cars and coaches. He's proud of his smart red paint, and so is his driver. Everyone says you brighten up their day, James. One morning, James whistled loudly at the other engines. Look at me. I am the smartest, most useful engine on the line. Rubbish, replied Thomas. We're all useful. Sir Topham Hatt says so, and he's head of the whole railway. You know what, James? Added Percy. What? Replied James. You're getting all puffed up. James huffed away. Later, he was still boasting. I'm the pride of the line. I saw you pulling freight cars, snorted Gordon. You're only a goods engine. I pull coaches, too. Not as much as I do. But Sir Topham Hatt has plans for me. James was only making this up, but Gordon believed him. What plans? Wait and see. Oh dear, he thought. Now what'll I do? Thomas was shunting shining new coaches. Good morning, James. Are those coaches for me? Asked James hopefully. No, these are for Gordon's Express. I'll fetch your freight cars next. But James was going to play a trick on the other engines. Actually, Thomas, I'm taking the coaches. Sir Topham Hatt asked me to tell you. What about the cars? Asked Thomas. Give them to Gordon. Come on, Thomas, said his driver. Orders are orders. So when James's driver returned, James was coupled to the coaches and he puffed away. Thomas returned with the freight cars, and a few minutes later, Gordon arrived. Where's the express? Thomas told him about James, and so here are your cars. Gordon was very cross, and so was his driver. Wait till Sir Topham Hatt hears about this. Meanwhile, James was enjoying himself enormously. What a clever plan! What a clever plan! He chuffed. Then he saw Sir Topham Hatt. Some jokes are funny, but not this one, James. You have caused confusion. Yes, sir, said James. You will now stay in your shed until you are wanted. The other engines teased James. I wonder who'll be pulling the express today, said Gordon. I expect it'll be you, replied Henry. James is stuck in the shed for being silly. James felt sad. Next morning, he went back to work. Hello, whistled Thomas. Good to see you out and about again. I'm sorry I tricked you, said James. Are these my cars? Yes, replied Thomas kindly. They are pleased to have you back. James set off to the harbor with his train of freight cars. He bustled about all day, pushing and pulling them into place. Time to go home now, James, said his driver at last. No cars or passengers, just we two. But his driver was wrong. Excuse me, called a man. I have a meeting with Sir Topham Hatt, and I mustn't be late. May I ride back with you? Of course, replied James's driver. Then he whispered to James, This gentleman is a railway inspector. James was most impressed. He steamed along the line as smoothly and quickly as he could. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting on the platform, and the railway inspector greeted him warmly. This clever engine gave me a splendid ride. You must be proud of him. Yes, indeed. Once again, you are a really useful engine.
It was a crisp, cold winter day on the island of Sodor. Snow lay thick on the ground. The engines were working extra hard. James was pulling the slow goods train. He had stopped at a signal. Percy pulled up alongside carrying the mail. "Hello, James," said Percy. Then the signal changed to green. "Goodbye, James," whistled Percy, and he was off in a flash. "I was here first," grumbled James. "Why do I have to wait?" "The mail train is more important than slow goods," said his driver. Later, when James stopped for water, Thomas was already in front of him. "I have to go first," said Thomas excitedly. "I am a guaranteed connection." "Everyone has a more important job than me," grumbled James. "Nonsense," said Thomas. "Everyone knows you're a really useful engine." But James wanted to be an important engine, too. Later that day, Sir Topham Hatt came to see James. "You must take coal to all the stations on the island," he boomed. "If the fires in the waiting room go out, the passengers will get cold and complain." "It is a very important job," he added. "You can rely on me, sir," said James proudly. Sir Topham Hatt left. James was excited. "An important job," he said happily. "Phew," sniffed Gordon. "It's only a load of coal after all." "Nonsense," snorted James. "I am going to keep the passengers warm. What could be more important than that?" And he wheeshed over to the water tower. But there was a line at the water tank. "Come on," he steamed impatiently. "I have an important job to do." "Wait your turn, bossy boiler," said Thomas. James felt too important to wait, so he didn't. James rushed to the coaling station. He met Edward waiting at a junction. Edward was looking bothered. He had too many jobs and he was feeling puffed out. "Can you take these slate cars to the quarry?" Edward asked. "Sorry, Edward, but I can't," puffed James. "I've got the most important job on the island." And he chuffed grandly away. James arrived at the coaling station. He buffered up to the coal cars and was on his way. James was looking forward to delivering his coal. "Now I'm useful and important," he chuffed happily. Then there was trouble. James puffed harder and harder. He went faster and faster. And then he began to feel hotter and hotter. "I don't feel well," wailed James. And he had to stop. "Your water tanks have run dry," his driver told him. "We'll have to wait for help." Just then, Edward pulled up beside James. "Please push me to the water tank," pleaded James. "I'm sorry," Edward puffed sadly. "You wouldn't take my freight cars to the quarry, and now I'm running late with my passenger train." And Edward steamed away. Edward stopped and told the signalman all about James. The signalman telephoned for help, and soon Salty was on his way. He pulled up alongside James. "Why didn't you fill up with water this morning, matey?" James told him about the line at the water tank. "I've heard you were too busy to help Edward too," said Salty. "I was in a hurry," protested James. "Mine is the most important job on the island." "No job is more important than helping another engine," said Salty firmly. And deep down in his boiler, James knew Salty was right. Thanks to Salty, James's water tank was soon filled and he was well on his way. He knew he had to make up for lost time. Then James saw Diesel up ahead. He had broken down and looked unhappy. James wanted to tease him, but then he remembered what Salty had said. No job is more important than helping another engine, he said to himself. And even Diesel is an engine. Come on, Diesel. I'll push you back to the sheds. Pushing Diesel and pulling freight cars was hard work. At last, James got Diesel to the repair yard, but he still had to deliver his coal. The wind blew, and it was getting colder by the minute. James steamed all over the island delivering coal to the station waiting rooms. Everyone was pleased to see James. Thanks to him, they were all kept toasty warm. The next morning, Sir Topham Hatt came to see James. He knew all about him running out of water and his not helping with Edward's trucks. "I'm sorry, sir," said James. "I put my own job first." "But you did learn your lesson, and you helped Diesel," Sir Topham Hatt boomed cheerfully. "And you delivered your coal on time. You, James, are a really useful engine." James nearly burst with pride. "Thank you, sir," he said. Being really useful was better than feeling.
One night, Henry and Gordon were alone with James. Although Sir Topham Hatt was beginning to think well of him, whenever a chance came, the other engines would talk of nothing but bootlaces. "Remember when they had to use a bootlace to get you out of trouble, James?" they would tease. James tried to get back by talking about Henry, who got shut up in a tunnel, and Gordon, who got stuck on a hill, but they wouldn't listen. "You talk too much, little James," said Gordon. "A fine, strong engine like me has something to talk about. I'm the only engine who can pull the express. When I'm not there, they need two engines. Think of that. I've pulled expresses for years and have never once lost my way. I seem to know the right line by instinct." Every wise engine knows that the signalman sets the switches to make the engines run on the right tracks. But Gordon was so proud he had forgotten. "Wake up, James," said Gordon next morning. "It's time for the express. What are you doing? Odd jobs? Ah, well, we all have to begin somewhere, don't we? Run along and get my coaches. Don't be late." James went to get Gordon's coaches. They were all shining with new paint. He was careful not to bump them, and they followed him smoothly into the station singing happily, "We're going away! We're going away!" "I wish I were going with you," said James. "I should love to pull the express and go flying along the line." Gordon, with much noise and blowing of steam, got ready to back onto the train. Sir Topham Hatt was on the train with other important people, and as soon as they heard the conductor's whistle, Gordon started. "Look at me now," he puffed, and the coaches glided after him. "Boop, boop, 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 boop. Goodbye, little James. See you tomorrow." James watched the train disappear and then went back to work. He pushed some freight cars into their proper sidings and went to fetch the coaches for another train. James had just brought the coaches to the platform when he heard a mournful noise. There was Gordon trying to sneak into the station without being noticed. "Hello, Gordon. Is it tomorrow?" Gordon didn't answer. He just let off steam feebly. "Did you lose your way, Gordon?" "No, it was lost for me. I was switched off the main line onto the loop. I had to go all round and back again." "Perhaps it was instinct," said James. All the passengers were shouting at the ticket window, "We want our money back." Sir Topham Hatt climbed onto a cart and blew the conductor's whistle so loudly that they all stopped to look at him. Then he promised them a new train at once. "Gordon can't do it. Will you pull it for us, James?" Yes, sir. I'll try. So James was coupled on and everyone got in. Do your best, James, said Sir Topham Hatt. Come along, puffed James. You're pulling us well, sang the coaches. Hurry, 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 puffed James. Bridges and stations flashed by. The passengers cheered, and they soon reached the station. Everyone said thank you to James, and Sir Topham Hatt was very impressed. Well done. Would you like to pull the express sometimes? Yes, please, answered James. Next day, when James came by, Gordon was pushing freight cars. I like some quiet work for a change, he said. I'm teaching these cars manners. You did well with those coaches, I hear. Good, we'll show them. And he gave his cars a bump. James and Gordon are now good friends. James sometimes takes the express to give Gordon a rest. Gordon never talks about bootlaces, and they're both quite agreed. James had not been out to push coaches or freight cars in the yard for several days. He was feeling miserable. Oh, dear. I wonder how long I shall have to stay in the shed. Will anyone ever see my red coat again? Why did I go so fast that I made a hole in one of my coaches that had to be mended with, of all things, a passenger's bootlace? At last, Sir Topham Hatt arrived. I know you're sorry, James, and I know, too, that you want to be a useful engine. People are laughing at my railway, and I do not like that at all. I will try hard to do my best, said James. That's a good engine. There's nothing like determination. I want you to pull some freight cars for me. James was delighted and puffed away. Here's your freight train, James, said Thomas. Have you got some bootlaces ready? And he ran off laughing. Oh, no, said the freight cars. We want a proper engine, not a red monster. James took no notice and started as soon as the conductor was ready. Come along, he puffed. We won't, screamed the freight cars. But James didn't care, and he pulled the screeching cars sternly out of the station. The cars tried hard to make him give up, but he still kept on. Sometimes their brakes would slip on, and sometimes their axles would run hot, and each time the trouble had to be put right. And each time James would start again, determined not to let them beat him. Give up, you can't pull us, you can't, called the cars. I can and I will, puffed James. And slowly but surely he pulled them along the line. At last they saw Gordon's Hill. Look out for trouble, James, warned his driver. We'll go fast and get them up before they know it. Don't let them stop you. So James went faster. Soon they were halfway up. I'm doing it, he panted. Will the top never come? Then, with a sudden jerk, it all came easier. I've done it! Hooray! It's easy now! But his driver shut off steam. They've done it again! We've left our tail behind, look! The last cars were running backwards down the hill. The coupling had snapped. But the conductor stopped the cars and got out to warn approaching engines. That's why it was easy, said James, as he backed the other cars carefully down. What silly things freight cars are! There might have been an accident. Should I help you, James? Called Edward. No, thank you. I'll pull them myself. Good. Don't let them beat you. You're doing well, whistled Edward, as James slowly struggled up the hill. can do it! I can do it, he puffed. He pulled and puffed as hard as he could. I've done it! I've done it, he panted. James was resting in the yard when Edward pulled up. Beep, beep, he whistled. Then James saw Sir Topham Hatt. Oh, dear, what will he say? He asked himself. But Sir Topham Hatt was smiling. I was in Edward's train, and I saw everything. You've made the most troublesome train on the line behave. After that performance, you deserve to keep your red coat.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Take a look who's coming down the track. Make way for James, hooray for James. A shiny, shiny paint with a jet black stack. Make way for James, hooray for James. What is for certain and we really should note, it's indisputable, let's take a vote. He's the really splendid engine with a bright red coat. James, oh, he can brag all day how fast he goes, how good he looks, he's such a pose. But what about the time he got covered in mud? Oh, what a dope, what a dud. But up and down the line you'll hear the others say, despite his vanity, he really is okay. Dependable, reliable, and seldom late. We all think James is great. Speeding down the line like a lightning flash. Make way for James, hooray for James. Hang on to your hat as he whooshes past. Make way for James, hooray for James. He really knows how to stage a show. You better stand back and watch him go. He's the really splendid engine with a bright red coat. Take it over the top. Look at who's swanning it down the track. Make way for James, hooray for James. He never looks up, he never looks back. Make way for James, hooray for James. A tad conceited and really quite vain. He knows we love him just the same. Take a look who's coming down the track. Make way for James, hooray for James. The shiny, shiny paint